This is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer, a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Lee Cleghorn of Outer Range Brewing, and this week I'm glad to be talking with my friend, Preston Thoeny of Rittenhouse Brewing. We'll get into that in just a moment, but first, this message.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tee combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tee's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttee.com. That's blog.firsdtea.com.
Preston, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Lee, thanks for having me.
Yeah, how you doing down there in Arizona?
Doing great. Weather's beautiful for once, so we've been really enjoying it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm super stoked to be talking with you. It's been a while. Great to catch up. Got some great things to cover here. First, could you just give a quick little intro of yourself? We'll go into the specifics later on, but quick intro for the listeners.
Yeah. My name, like you said, is Preston Thoeny, and I'm one of the founders of Rittenhouse Brewing Company. I don't really have a current title now, but kind of overseeing all of production. We have a head brewer and a couple lead brewers and directors of production. So I'm kind of these days kind of overseeing all of that and just filling in where I'm needed. And then, I have two partners, Drew Poole and Bill Hammond, and three of us founded the brewery 8 years ago. So.
All right, there you go. And for those of you who don't know, Rittenhouse is down in Phoenix. And Preston's got a pretty good history in the Southwest. I know we met initially several years ago in our tap room, I think is where we first met, in Colorado, because you've got some Colorado roots. Can you kind of talk about your link to the Southwest in general and in Arizona?
Yeah, my family has lived in Arizona since like the 1880s. And then for whatever reason, I was born in Colorado and then moved back here when I was a little kid. So pretty much everyone's a native except for me. And it's contentious during the holidays. But we always loved Colorado and would go back for fishing and camping and stuff. And not to correct you this early in the podcast, but first time we met was in Virginia. That's a
lie. I've never been to Virginia.
But yeah, the Luke, who is our old head brewer, also was born in Colorado, and he told me that you guys were making world-class beer and just were really good people. So, I always had my eyes out to run into you somewhere, and then I think we just hit it off from there.
Yeah, it's been a great relationship ever since. You have down in Arizona, Rittenhouse has expanded a lot recently, but I think you have probably one of the most beautiful tap rooms ever. You've been there, you know what I'm talking about. But if you have not, it is just a small house. When you walk in there, you're literally walking into a house on a main street, old desert style house, and you've got a lot of decorations in there, speaking to the desert life heritage of Arizona. How did you guys find that tiny house? And there's not a lot of tap rooms out there that exist in a house. It's super cool. But how'd you guys find that space, and how did it get started? What was the origin of Rittenhouse?
Yeah, the tap room was kind of incidental. So we had this business plan that Drew and Bill had put together, and they brought me in to do the production side. And then we got everything approved, with the SBA loans and stuff like that. And the next step was to find property. And finding brewing property is pretty tough in Phoenix for a lot of reasons, especially to plan ahead. We knew we wanted to grow to a certain volume, so we needed production space, tap room, and cold storage. And that usually means a big building. And so we were looking for big buildings, and they weren't in the parts of town we wanted. And then we happened to, Drew or Bill was driving by and saw a sign for cold storage for rent. So we decided to check that out. And it was this huge walk-in for a bakery that had gone under. And it was beautiful, and it was brand new, and that was great. And then there was 2 other buildings on the property. So we asked, what about these? And kind of the gist was, well, there's a house up front. It's in rough shape. We're going to remodel it. And then there's this warehouse in the back that we're going to demo. And it was, parts of it were 100 years old. Parts of it were 40 years old. It was kind of pieced together. And it was a 2-story. So we kind of came up with a plan, which is, well, if we remodel the front house, that's our tap room. We've got giant cold storage. And then let's see what we can do with this 3rd building. And the top story was like apartments, but like non-zoned apartments, really sketchy. There was just a bunch of birds in there, and it was trouble. So we just pulled out the floor, put a new floor in, had to go down and put, re-support the flooring and stuff. And so we turned this kind of hodgepodge 2-story multi-use building into a warehouse. And that left the front, which was the original house. I think the original story was the guy lived up front, 80, 90 years ago. And then that back building is where he made mirrors, is what we were told. And I don't know what that means for us, but it's interesting, I suppose. But so he had that warehouse, and we use that today. And it's been a little bit tricky. We got the height we wanted, but the square footage wasn't much. So we've had to get all custom tanks, tall and narrow 30-barrel tanks to fill up the space. But it's worked really well for us.
Yeah, well, you keep your stainless so clean back there. It's kind of like a mirror factory still.
Now, one of the 3 hours a day we spend.
Yeah, it shows. One of the things I think is crazy about your space is, a lot of people know about the challenges of finding real estate and starting a business, and particularly a brewery. Ceiling height is always one of them that you're looking for. Trying to always look for at least 10 to 12 foot ceilings at a minimum. But you have filled out your space completely pretty quickly, it looks like. But one thing that always sneaks up on people is the logistical footprint required for a brewery that you don't really predict. And one of the creative ways that you guys have solved that is where you would can beers. I don't know if you're still doing that, but back in the day, can you talk about where you would can beers?
Yeah. So yeah, like we said, that it's entirely full, that the brew house, the brewery building. So we use a mobile canner, and we can only fit them halfway in. So they stick out into the yard halfway. And so we've since built another structure to make things a little easier on everyone. So we have added what is normally our grain room for grain storage, milling, and Chris Hopper is also where the canning line runs now. So yeah, we kind of just have to make do with the space. To that point, like, we have no room for barrels, and we do a lot of barrel aging. So in order to do that cold storage, because it's so big, we have hundreds of barrels in cold storage, which is great because you get this cool character from it. But there's a lot of juggling because you still need those higher temperatures to get a lot of those flavors from the wood and the oak. So it's a lot of barrel juggling, which, is something this time of year is a little bit easier, but when it's 120 degrees out, you kind of get forced into some corners on that. But with our
it does get hot down there. I think
it's wild.
inside the cold room is like a favorite place for people to be when they visit. So fortunately, it's giant.
Yeah.
When you were out there one day canning with a mobile canner, I'm sure you might have looked back on your life and thought about the events that led you to be there. How did you get into beer? Can you talk about just your descent into the beer world and how that happened throughout your life?
Yeah, it's, as someone who listens to this podcast, people have really interesting stories. Mine's not particularly interesting, so I'll try and.
You're in the Anheuser-Busch family, right? That's your lineage.
I wish it was something cool like that. When I was in college, I worked with a guy who was a home brewer, and it pretty much was him saying, I want to open a brewery. I think you'd be good at brewing because I have an affinity to science, like a lot of brewers. He's like, do you want to work with me on some recipes? So I did that for like 6 months. Won a medal at my first competition and thought I'd mastered brewing. It wasn't until recently we found the old judges' comments, and they hated the beer, but no one else had entered in that category. So I got bronze, no silver or gold awarded, and no one else entered. So, but there was like 12 years where I thought I just nailed it out of the park. But having not knowing I was mediocre at best, I was like, well, next step is find a brewery. And one of my years at college, I had lived in Montana and went to school up there. So I was like, well, they have a lot of breweries, a lot of mid-size and large breweries making cool stuff. So I'll go up there and see if I can get a job. So I went up there and fortunately was within 6 months able to find a brewing job without having experience outside of home brewing, and started brewing for Big Sky Brewing in Missoula, and absolutely loved it. The culture there was great. The beer was really solid, and the practices. I mean, it's a lot of science-driven stuff, a lot of lab work and stuff like that, but also just a lot of horse sense and knowing how to pivot during brews and stuff like that when you're doing large batches. So I really enjoyed my time there. It was great. And then Drew, one of the founders here, his wife and I had grown up together, and him and Bill wanted to open a brewery. And Drew's wife was like, oh, I actually know a brewer. He's up in Montana right now. So they called me up, came down, and we started doing this. So, it happened pretty quick enough that I kind of feel like an observer now to the whole thing, but it all kind of hashed out.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have been killing it, obviously. And from the beginning, you had, your wife is very talented too, Lauren, with the design. There's a lot of the labels. I don't know if she does all of them, but it's definitely a family affair, and you got a great team down there that is getting successes from multiple locations of Wren House now. And something that has interested me is your success, watching that over the past couple of years, particularly just at GABF, winning medals. And you have a super hype brewery down there in Arizona, and you also got the professional accolades to back it up. And so you stepped up from your bronze medal from home brewing, and you guys have been getting some great recognition over the past several years for your beers professionally. And I was wondering if you could speak to kind of the process you all have. I know medals have come out of the original location, and I think now also up with Luke at the second location up north in Prescott. And I was wondering if you could tell us your secrets.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any secrets, but I wish we did. GABF's interesting to us. As fans of the community that is beer, even before we had breweries, GABF was just this amazing festival that kind of was the accumulation of all things beer, the brewers, the beer itself, but the patrons, the consumers, the fans of beer. I mean, that's really their time to shine, try beers they otherwise wouldn't get to try. And that's kind of, the driving focus of beer in a lot of ways. So to us, it was always this great opportunity. And so I think we were 3 months old when we entered our first GABF, and I was using my homebrew gun to fill bottles and send them out. And I didn't get a medal because other people had entered those categories, unlike homebrewing. So it was humbling. But we definitely made it a point. You look at some of these great breweries, and not only to win a medal, but to win it multiple times. And there's certainly a lot of great breweries, like Bierstadt, or there's plenty of breweries that don't enter, and they have reasons for it, whether it's because of their ethos or just because they're uninterested in it. These breweries that don't enter have, I don't think they're crazy for not entering. I understand both sides of it. But we certainly enjoy the competition. We enjoy the judge feedback. And we've kind of pushed ourselves. And it's a good litmus too, right? So and winning the medal is great. That's the end goal. But getting those judges' comments back and seeing that, 4 of your 6 beers made it to the final table, that's not something you can market. So we're not doing that for hype. We're doing that so that we're we're dialed in. What can we do next year? What are these best beers in the world doing that we're not? It's an identifiable litmus that we can use to improve our beer. And I'd say the interesting thing, and if there are young brewers out there who want to, or young breweries out there that want to compete, our first, I want to say,
are you about to tell them to not compete against you?
Yeah.
Is that what you're about to do?
Don't enter in hazy IPA. No, the first 4 years, maybe even 5, we were well, let's not enter our IPA. You can never win for IPA. There's too many good IPAs out there. And same with our Valley beer, our American lager. It's good, but there's so many of those. Let's enter our pumpkin wheat wine. Well, that's great, but you lose pumpkin wheat wine. It's more of a bummer than losing hazy IPA. So we decided, let's just enter our cores in the beers we're most proud of. Who cares how many people there are? And then it'll give us even more push to improve those beers. And the first year we did that, we got our first medal, which was silver for Valley beer, our American lager. And that was great. It was always a goal of ours to win a medal, and that was really special for sure. And then things kind of changed the next year when we got gold for hazy IPA, because I don't know how you quantify something like that internally. It was such a great honor, but there's a certain amount of luck involved. I mean, there was probably 20 beers on that table at the last table that we were just lucky to be included on, and to make it out on top was something we probably will never replicate. I can't imagine with how many breweries and great IPA breweries there are. I think we're very fortunate to have won it. But but it gave us that push. Let's try and win it again. Let's get 2-time hazy. And we know that that's a pretty big hill to climb, but it's something that all year we're working on to make it as good as that batch or better than that batch. Or why did that one win? And last year it just made it 2 rounds. And I think that's the value of those competitions is being able to use that as a metric, instead of saying like, oh, everyone in the tap room really likes that beer. And that's great. And you can rest on your laurels, and it is still a good beer, and you should do that. But the amount of times we've made small tweaks, and then our guests are like, oh, this batch is even better. You know, sometimes you need that analytical drive to help adjust the beer.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the unique things about you guys. You know, you're racking in medals for IPAs and lagers, and that's definitely a rare feat. So just killing it down there, one beer at a time. But you guys came across like a crazy opportunity a couple of years ago. It kind of came, at least from the outside, seemed out of left field. The opportunity you had to expand. I know you and I had talked over the years a little bit about what you're going to do, because you're brewing in a closet down there behind the house in Phoenix that you call the brewery. And we're definitely looking for other places to go. And you talked about the real estate market in Phoenix was so hot. Places were coming on the market, off the market, and it's really hard to plan and start sourcing equipment for those types of decisions in such a competitive real estate market. And then you did something totally different, and you found a production facility. You and your partners found that facility up north, and got that started about a year ago. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, that was just a crazy 6 or 9 months. We actually bought a property right down the street, and we were going to do some offsite production on with probably no tap room. And then we were looking for a 30-barrel brew house to fit in it. And it was cool. It was an old church. And someone told us that the Gordon Biersch in Glendale outside Phoenix was being liquidated, and they needed everything gone. So I went up there unannounced, and I really wanted to filter, and I knew that they filtered their beers. And then the guy who was the company that was liquidating them was like, make an offer, we'll give you everything. So we did that, and so unexpectedly we had this 30-barrel lager brew house with a mash kettle and all that, and that was exciting, except it didn't fit into the building we had. And we kind of were like, well, okay, so we have this building, we have a brewery, and they don't fit together. So the next step was find a new building. So we started looking around, and we found one, and we got really close. We had plans drawn up, and then something would happen. And then we found one that was a complete gut. It was a really cool property. It had a bunch of little buildings on it. It'd be a complete gut, and then keep a couple walls, and then build up, and it'd be this great event space. And we met with the architect, and Drew and Bill are handling the business side of it, and they want to know, X, Y, and Z. And the only thing I want to know is, when can I brew? And I said, can I do it in a year and a half? And he's like, no. And I was like, what about 2 years? And the architect said, I don't think we're breaking ground in 2 years. And so I was just, that's surreal to me to be sitting on all this stuff for 2 years. So I was having my own internal conflict. And then my partner, Bill, went out of town. And then Luke, who was our head brewer, had heard from a friend that Prescott Brewing in Prescott, Arizona, was up for sale. And so I made some calls. Drew and I started looking at it, and it wasn't like a fire sale. I mean, it was whatever it was evaluated at. But the difference was you could sign the paperwork and start brewing that day. And so Bill got off his plane to the East Coast and had 20 missed calls and was like, hey, Bill, we need to buy this brewery today. And he's just like, I'm on family vacation. So he spent the first day at a beach house with his family, just orchestrating this buyout. And we pulled the trigger. It happened in a matter of hours. And then of course there's 2 months of paperwork and all that, but without meaning to, we ended up with an entirely new plan, and then pivoted our structure around that new building. And so it all worked out really well. The Gordon Biersch brew house, for instance, we didn't need that brew house anymore because we had a beautiful 30 barrel in Prescott, but all of the tanks, the filter, all this ancillary equipment is what was missing in Prescott. Prescott had a 30 barrel brew house, but not a lot of big tanks. So we were able to bring up 4 60 barrel tanks and some 30s, and double the capacity of that brew house. So now we have a 120, a 90, 5 60s, and a bunch of 30s. And all of that was all of these crazy, unexpected events happening the same year, kind of built that brewery. And the plan was we had a growth structure planned. And I think first step though, as a brewer, is I just want to fill all the tanks. So we just filled all the tanks the first week. Luke just brewed nonstop. We'd fill one tank and then I'd hook up the glycol and electrical to the next tank. And then the next day we'd move down the line, and each day we'd hook up a tank and brew into it.
Yeah.
For 2 weeks, like crazy people. And then since that day, we've never had an empty tank up there. So we had no expectation that the demand would be there, but fortunately it was. And Prescott's just kind of been just this lifesaver for us, really pulling off the burden of the core beers, brewing them exceptionally well. The team up there is just killing it, and then allowing a little bit of flexibility in Phoenix to continue kind of what we're known for, which is just a constant stream of one-off beers.
Yeah, and so you're going through all this growth. You're obviously, you and the team obviously very dialed into the market, going from such a small brewery footprint into production facility. I think brewers are all excited about lagers, and we've been trying to push this lager thing for a long time, just because that's what we want to drink while we're spending time at the brewery, because you can't, house several hazy IPAs in a day every day and keep going. But there's a lot of data out there that says IPAs are still, like, by far the number one seller. Still a lot of growth in IPAs. And even though we talk a lot about lagers, we still see in our brewery IPAs, outselling everything, and we can't fill the tanks fast enough for IPA. What are you guys seeing as you're expanding to this market, going, over just the span of a couple years from a small footprint into that big production facility? How are you all reading the market for craft beers in terms of style?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's interesting to see. So the first beer we ever brewed was a lager, Senior Gallo Mexican lager. It was one of my sticking points was to always have a lager on tap. And when you're a startup and we're paying out of pocket for grain, and everyone knows those crazy days when you start a brewery. It was definitely a burden at first to have this beer that wouldn't sell, but it worked well because it didn't sell. So we always had one on tap, and it'd be like, I only had to brew a lager every 9 months. So we now no longer have that problem. But it's something that's interesting, which is we're still doing 6 to 8 weeks minimum on our lagers. And we have 2, soon to be 4 core lagers. And that means every time we turn a lager, we could have turned 2 IPAs, especially knowing IPAs will sell. In theory, you would need 2 times more profitable beer out of a lager, but that's not the case. You can't put that opportunity cost into lagers when big beer has historically been able to drive that price down, right? So we're kind of in a in-between phase because also there's detriment to not having those lagers, both in diversity of tap options, but also there are people, there's a lot of people today who drink mostly lagers. So if you get rid of those, you lose entire swaths of clientele. And additionally, there's people who don't drink craft beer. They only drink lagers.
I don't know those people, so.
It's all of my friends and family. And if they're over at my house watching a Suns game or going fishing, I can't go, oh, I didn't bring Coors Light, but here's a double hazy IPA for you. They'll just pass on the beer. There's so to have that option, to have Valley beer, and it's not a consolation prize. They really enjoy it. It's reminiscent of the things they're looking for in a beer. That's a huge part of the market. We want to continue to have beer for everyone, and that means lagers. Now, specifically, like you said, there's this huge lager boom going on, European lagers mainly. And we're seeing that from great breweries all over the place. We have seen that, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's safe to say the lagers actually are outselling the IPAs, or at least matching them in-house. So from a draft perspective, like you said, people want to come in and have 2 or 3 beers. They're not going to do that with our triple hazy. So something we've done recently is we've pulled back a lot of canning of our lagers. We just dropped it 30% because we saw that our kegs would blow in 2 weeks of a 30-barrel batch, but we'd have cans for 2 months. So we're switching to more draft. And this year, next year, the beginning of next year, we're opening a new tap room in Ahwatukee, which is a Phoenix suburb, southwest of our current tap room. And it'll be lager driven with a lot of European, Czech and German inspired characteristics to the actual tap room, but also with consideration to how the beer is poured and how the beer is brewed, really give us the ability to slow down on these beers and make beers with that nuance that people expect from these great lager breweries. And that's something I think the environment is a big part of. If you go to Freem or Bierstadt and drink one of their Pilsners, it's this amazing opportunity, and you just never had a better moment in your life. I don't know that you still have that experience if your first time drinking it is out of a can at your friend's house. And so for us to be able to give that environment, I think that's why the lagers are so valuable in the tap room. And then, of course, we'll be canning 40% of it still. But I think that the push towards lagers is a mix of people liking those beers, the drinkability, the complexity, the character, the uniqueness of them, but also the environment, sitting down, like people used to at a pub and drinking a few pints of lager with your friends, is a unique kind of humbling experience compared to, some other flavors we might be offering at the time.
Yeah. I'll talk more a little bit about that new tap room coming and also the connection between Wren House and outer space. But first, we're going to take a short break for this message and then come right back for more of this conversation with Preston Thoeny of Wren House Brewing.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tea combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tea's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttea.com. That's blog.firsttea.com.
All right, we're back with Preston of Wren House Brewing, talking about their expansion, lagers, and outer space. Preston, before we get to your tap room expansion, I'd like to dig into outer space, specifically Mars. You invited us a couple God dang, when was that? A couple years ago. I guess it was like 2 years ago now. Some point down to your place to do a collaboration, which is normal. You know, we've been down there to do that, but this was a unique collaboration that you all set up with the rover crew for the Mars mission, for the Mars rover mission. And you were incredibly nice to invite us down because you knew that my daughter Madeline was really into outer space, and you've got some kids, so understood how important that was. And so we went down there and did that, and we basically just tagged along while you, using the relationship you had built with this crew over several months, and made a beer with these people who are actually huge craft beer fans. What was that collaboration? How did that come together? Are you still working with them? What are they doing? Are we still on Mars?
We're still on Mars. Yeah, so that's interesting. I guess what it comes down to is when you release 3 new beers a week, you have to come up with 3 new names a week. And we try and get clever sometimes, but sometimes it's just things I'm into at that time. And I love space travel and space exploration and science and stuff like that. And we were launching a mission to Mars, Perseverance and Ingenuity. And so I was like, oh, we have 2 IBAs coming out. Let's just call them Perseverance and Ingenuity. And someone commented on the Instagram post, and it was forwarded to me, and it was just like, there's someone who'd made some inside comment and tagged some friends, and it was like, hey, look, our rover's on a beer can. And so I reached out to that person, and I was like, are you involved in this? And she was like, oh yeah, we're out of ASU. So Arizona State University is right down the street, or down the freeway, 15 minutes or so. And they have a great space program there, and do a lot of rovers and other science specialties for NASA and other firms. And so I was like, well, I'd love to meet you. Come down. I'll give you guys some beers and posters. And so I got to meet Corinne and some of the other ladies who worked there, and they were just the nicest people in the world. They had the same passion for science as I do, except theirs is amplified because they're actually doing it for a living. So I got to just sit there and pepper them with questions about, how do you guys do this? How do you do that? And they're the ones who run the I think it's Mastercam, the camera on the Mars rover. So this group of people are the first ones to see images of Mars as they get beamed to Earth. And it was just this awesome opportunity. And I said, well, if you ever want to brew a beer, because they're big fans of beer and all that entails, I said, come down. And they were really excited. And I knew your daughter loves space and science. So it got me an excuse to hang out with you guys, and brought them down. And the ladies at that work on the rover were super generous and were able to bring us some stickers and answer all the kids' questions and all my questions. And it just was this really cool experience. And it all centered around beer. And I think that's something that I like, is doing collabs with people like that, is being able to kind of bridge these unrelated careers, and build these relationships, all just because we named a beer after perseverance. And so we ended up naming that one Moxie, which was one of the scientific experiments being done with the rover and that mission. And then scientists from MIT were reaching out. This one PhD was like, "Oh, I designed Moxie. We send me some beers." And then someone from NASA reached out and was like, "Can we have a poster? We love this." And it was just this surreal experience as such a geek for this stuff to reach these people that we would have absolutely not reached. They're not like, "Oh, you've got a new Czech lager coming out. Will you send me one?" They were in it for this specific reason. And we could have been done with that, but what we did was we wanted to keep that going, that mutual love for each other's kind of passions. And so now we're doing a series, and it's going to be an indefinite amount of beers. We're going to do it until we're tired of doing it. But thereafter, the titles are based on heavenly bodies, so planets and moons and asteroids and stuff like that. So we've done Mercury, Venus, and Earth so far. We're going to do Moon and a couple asteroids, and then some other planets. And the collaborative part is we talk to them about the beer ahead of time. These group of scientists are involved in that part weeks in advance, making sure we try and match a beer to the satellite as best as possible. And so we get the beer done, and then they bring out a scientist who has personal experience studying that body, and then gives a presentation while everyone's drinking the beer at the release. So, for Venus, we have someone who's involved either academically or professionally with the planet Venus. And they come down and do a slideshow, and they're these brilliant people, and they're talking, answering questions while everyone's drinking that beer. And the amount of, new guests, new customers we've gotten from that has been really cool, and created this kind of small community of people who can come to Wren House and kind of geek out on these releases. So I'm for that.
I see that totally. I mean, when we were down there, it was really funny to see like all these, the Mars rover team crew nerding out over beer, and having this kind of crush on the whole brew scene, and then vice versa. All the brewers have this dreamy look in their eye, talking to all these scientists who are actually doing incredible, real life missions out there that making a big difference. So I thought that was super cool, super creative for you guys to do that and keep going with it. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I look forward to talking with you more about that and learning more about it in the new tap room you guys set up. When is that going to open?
We'll always
hold you to it. Whatever you say, hold you to it.
It's always 2 months out. So I'd tell you 2 to 3 months, but who knows?
Yeah, great. I guess the eternal return answer would be I'll be there in 2 to 3 months. So, yeah. Well, thanks so much for chatting, Preston. It's been great catching up, man, and hearing about what you guys have going on in the future. Preston is going to be back on the next episode of this show as the host, having a conversation with the brewer of his choosing, and that'll be on the air in 2 weeks. So make sure you tune in for that. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Thanks a lot, Preston.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by First Tea. First Tea delivers the ingredients and experience brewers need for delicious beers and innovative flavors, flexible order sizes, and direct from farm teas for your next brew. Find out more about First Tea by visiting blog.firsttea.com. That's blog.firsttea.com.